The rest of the above-quoted prediction is true, too, that is, if it was intended for me. I did walk away shaking my head. I did have a couple of experiences of seemingly paranormal effects, though these did not contribute to my understanding so much as to my perplexity. I will relate them because this kind of thing is an integral part of the story, and I trust that what is straight reportage will not be misconstrued as advocacy. These things happened, and nothing remotely like them had ever happened in my experience before, but the only grounds I have for associating them with the management is that they happened when they did. The first was a poltergeist type of event. It happened in October 1975, not long after I had received the first parcel of specimen material from John and at a time when I was debating with myself whether I could undertake this book. Late one night my wife and a friend watched a television program in the sitting room of my home. The program had a soporific effect on the other two, but I watched it through and at the end walked across the room and switched off the set. I then turned and spoke to the others and our friend woke up, and at that moment a potted plant on the mantelpiece behind me literally jumped out into the room and landed at my feet. When I realized what had happened, I said to our friend, "Did you see that?" He said yes, he had seen it, the plant had jumped off the mantelpiece. We sought a normal explanation. The only possible one was that I had knocked the plant off after switching off the television. But to have done so would have required a most unnatural up and round swing of the arm, which I was certain I had not performed. Moreover, the plant, which I later ascertained weighed just over 5 pounds, had not been toppled, but seemed to have been lifted, for it landed upright 2 or 3 feet away from the mantelpiece, and the saucer in which it stood was undisturbed. I remembered some of the tales I had heard about paranormal events at Ossining and around Uri, and I wondered. The second event occurred when I had already begun working on the book. I played through one of the cassette tapes of a communication, making notes and transcribing relevant portions as I did so. I left the cassette in my player and did some writing, then later in the day I wound back to check a point, but now the track was completely blank. It certainly could not have been erased normally in the interim. And it was not until later that I discovered that this particular communication was one of the very few of which there existed a duplicate copy, which suggests that it was deliberately selected for demonstration purposes. I was impressed, much more impressed than I had been by reading Andrige's accounts of the more sensational teleportation and dematerialization events that had occurred in connection with Uri, which is the reason I don't expect anyone else to be particularly impressed by these two anecdotes, though I think I had to report them as they were events that influenced my attitude to the work and the communications. Another influence has been my own experience of communication sessions. I have participated in 7 sessions over the past 9 months. This is not the context to report them in detail, but perhaps a description of what a typical session is like will help the reader to have a mental picture of what is going on when communications are summarized in later chapters. The first communication I participated in was at Orsett Hall, the former Whitmore ancestral home in Essex, now owned by John's close friend Tony Morgan. Phyllis had arrived from New York the previous day. Through listening to the tapes, including the one of her life story, I had formed an impression of a capable, resourceful, extrovert and probably rather formidable woman. To my relief I was wrong. Unostentatiously casual in dress and manner, rather short of stature with short blonde hair styled for convenience, talkative, fun-loving, down-to-earth, Phyllis seemed as normal and nice a person as one could meet. She is, but she's also something more. She prefers to work late, so it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when she, John and I left the other members of the weekend house party talking in the drawing room and went upstairs to Phyllis's room. She and John made the necessary preparations, arranging 3 upright chairs in close proximity, fixing the recording equipment, and putting on the copper bracelets that they have been instructed always to wear during sessions. During and for some time after these preparations, we continued the conversation we had been engaged in downstairs, which had nothing to do with our present purpose. Then John said we had better begin. Phyllis stubbed out her cigarette, composed herself in an upright posture with her hands resting on her knees and said she was ready, whereupon John switched off the room lights and placed a small torch in a position where it afforded us dim illumination but did not cast a direct light in Phyllis's direction. Phyllis began counting down from 45, her voice becoming softer and slower until she fell silent, her head slumped forward and to the left and her hands fell loosely down at her sides. She remained thus for a minute or two and then, very slowly, her head rose, her back straightened and her forearms came up to a horizontal position so that she was sitting as if holding a tray but with the palms of her hands turned inwards towards each other. Then her voice whispered, "We are here," very low, completely exhaling on the last word. John said, "Greetings, Tom," and introduced me. Tom is the name that the spokesman for the communicators has adopted for convenience of address, and here and in the sequel I shall also use it for convenience. Phyllis's voice soon became stronger, and through her Tom delivered a courteous, indeed flattering, long speech of welcome to me. The ending of the speech and the invitation to put a question were indicated by Phyllis's hands being lowered to her knees and Tom saying yes. I was impressed by Tom's eloquence, and I was both impressed and surprised to be told at one point in the communication precisely what I was thinking. Tom said, "Now into your mind at this moment comes the thought that you wonder what you are doing communicating with us, and if it is in truth another from a distant place that is speaking to you." That was indeed what I was thinking. The main subject of this communication was the present book. I was given to believe that my meeting John when I did was not fortuitous, and that I could bring certain qualities into reporting the communications which someone more closely involved would not be able to contribute, not the least among which were doubt, skepticism and objectivity. "You will be able to put the questions that will occur to people," Tom said. "This is a point I have continually borne in mind while writing this book. Probably the main initial credibility hurdle for readers of this book will be that communications from an extraterrestrial intelligence should come through a trance medium, and to conclude this chapter I propose to make a few observations on trance mediumship in general and on Phyllis's in particular. What we are asked to believe happens when Phyllis is in deep trance is that she leaves her body and that Tom, the spokesman for the communicators, takes over control of her body and her vocal mechanisms. What we see happen is certainly consistent with this explanation, and the content of the communications is certainly such as to make nonsense of any simplistic skeptic's suspicion that it is all clever play acting on Phyllis's part. But neither the content nor the observed events, nor the combination of the two, conclusively proves that this is in fact what happens, so we have to consider whether we have available any way round a simple believe it or not option, to ask whether there is any other evidence we can call on which may at least affect the balance of probabilities even if it does not constitute a final elucidation of the truth of the matter. We have three categories of such evidence: well-authenticated precedents from the literature of psychic research, certain statements that Phyllis has made about her trance experiences when she has returned to a normal waking state of consciousness, and relevant statements made in the communications themselves. Let us then see how the balance of probabilities is affected if we consider in turn the separate statements. A. That Phyllis leaves her body during trance, and B. That Tom takes possession of her body and control of its functions. We have ample evidence for the reality of out-of-the-body experiences, or to use an older and today less fashionable term, astral projections. The voluminous case records and scrupulous analyses of Dr. Robert Krukal, the testimonies of experiments such as Sylvan Muldoon, Oliver Fox and Robert Monroe, and the recent experimental researches of Drs. Pothoff and Targ at the Stanford Research Institute and of Professor Charles T. Tart at the University of California, not to mention the many testimonies of people who have undergone pseudo-death experiences and been brought back to life, have established beyond doubt that there is a component of human personality minus the bit of me that counts. As one experiment called it, that in certain circumstances can separate from the physical body, leaving the latter merely an envelope or shell. The experience of separation of our essential self from our physical body that occurs somewhere between the many unseen bodies that are said to exist, such as the astral and the etheric, is in fact by no means uncommon, and although for most people who have them such experiences are involuntary and rare, some people have learned and developed techniques for effecting separation at will. So the claim that during trance Phyllis leaves her body is neither outrageous nor inherently improbable. "Most times I am not anywhere," Phyllis says, referring to the times when she is in trance. She usually returns to normal consciousness as from a deep and dreamless sleep. She never has any recollection of the words she has spoken, but sometimes she retains vivid impressions of places she has visited while out of the body. And very often her post-session reports of her out-of-the-body experiences closely correspond with the information contained in the related communications. Some examples of these correspondences will be brought to the reader's attention in later chapters. The point I want to make here is that they constitute at least prima facie evidence for the authenticity of both the information and the post-session report. If we accept on the basis of the evidence of psychical research and of her own testimony that Phyllis may indeed leave her body when in trance, the next question to consider is whether the vacated body and its functions can be taken over by an external agency. On this subject a very interesting statement was made by Tom in a communication in January 1975. The one whom we communicate through is a physical transmitter, and it has to be a being that is willing, that will become passive in order for us to become active. In order to communicate with you, we must take over the subconscious of the being, and at the same time control the physical body. We must, with great effort, maintain a balance in the body. We must cause the body to have its heart operating, its lungs breathing, and all its major organs functioning. The reason for the drain of energy many times from the two of you is that we are maintaining the body in a suspended state.